So thank you. Thank you all for coming out to the Harrison Village Library. This is my home library now. I live in Harrison. And Kathleen was, I have presented here before, and Kathleen kind of tracked me down and asked me to do another one, and it took a couple of years. But here we are, finally. So my name is Carolyn Grimm, and during the part of my life that pays the bills, I'm an accountant, and I teach accounting at Central Maine Community College, go Mustangs. But the rest of the time I spend doing things like, I don't know, snooping through other people's diaries and reading the letters and things that they leave behind. So have a plan. If there's stuff you don't want people to read, A, keep it away from me. But one of the things that I've done is I've written this series of books called the Voices of Pondicherry, and it's based on real people and real stories of the founding of Bridgton and this area. So Harrison used to be part of Bridgton. I like to say I live in East Bridgton now because I'm still a Bridgton girl at heart. Sorry, Harrison. So it's led me down a lot of strange paths that I never would have expected to go down. But I wanted to talk tonight about my friend Cloe Perley. So every relationship starts somewhere, and I wanted to talk about how we met. So when I was about 10, my sister will recognize this picture. I was about to meet this book right here. And when I say I was about to meet this book, I mean this exact book. Because this is a book, the original Bridgton history book, that was at the Perley Memorial Library in South Bridgton. And when that closed down, that book came home with me. Like, that is the book that I learned about Bridgton history in. So I saw this entry, and it says 30 or more graves are located in the Perley family cemetery, which is near the Geiger Orchards to the east of the Sebago Road in South Bridgton. Squire Enoch Perley, the first settler in South Bridgton, is buried there with many of his descendants, also the Honorable Ashbel Cram, which is a sad story. We'll get into that another time. And another is Cloe Perley, a woman of color who lived in the family of Enoch Perley. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? And that was it. It was just sort of like a little footnote in a book. But this isn't a story about this little history girl in this book that she found. My interest at that point in time was on Enoch Perley. Like, I was a big Enoch Perley fan. He's one of the founding fathers of Bridgton. And for some reason, I don't know why, he just really fascinated me. So he came to Bridgton, and what would become Bridgton. He was here as early as 1773 because he's writing letters home to his family. And one of the things with the Perley family is they were prolific letter writers, and they never threw anything away. So we have so much information about this family because of that. So he came here and he built this little cabin. It's 18 by 18 with a 7-foot post, and you see here that there's a little loft window there. That will come into play later on. So he built this, but it's not a story about this cabin, even though I love this cabin. And here's the floor plan of it. This ladder right here was what they used to get up into that loft. But that was a sketch that one of his grandsons made of the cabin. So in the family cemetery, there is this tombstone. And it's the tombstone that was mentioned in the Bridgton history book. And the full inscription on it, it's got Enoch Perley and his wife Anna Flint, their daughter Huldah, who died young. And then at the bottom of it, it says down here, Cloe Perley, a woman of color who lived in the family of Enoch Perley from June 1778 to the time of her death. She died September 8, 1829, aged about 62 years. I thought, well, that's really interesting that she is on this gravestone with the family. So here's what we think happened with this tombstone. This was put up later. This was not put up at the time that Anna and Chloe and Enoch were buried. This was put up later on. And we think that it was put up after 1860 when Sarah Treadwell Perley, who was Enoch's daughter-in-law, died. So we think that's when it was put up. If she died in 1860, they put up this stone with all of the names of the family members. And it was likely created for Enoch's grandson. So John Putnam Perley, Samuel Farnsworth Perley, Augustus Perley, who owned one of those big South High Street houses in Bridgeton. But it was interesting to me that the grandsons honored honored Cloe Perley. They specifically put her on the headstone, which to me said, that feels like they're honoring her, like she was important to their family. Well, that's great. It's not really a story about a tombstone. What it's about is, it's about the day that I did the math. Because I had been, I'd heard that this woman of color lived with the Perley family, and it never really dawned on me until I did the math. She died in 1829 at about 62 years old, so she would have been born about 1767, and she came to Bridgeton in 1778. She would have been about 11 years old, and that completely changed the story. Because I'm thinking like this woman, she came up here from Massachusetts with them. No, she was a child when she came up here. And I thought, well, that's an interesting story. Perhaps I should look into that. And as Sue knows, once you get hold of an interesting story, you just got to go with it. So I asked myself the question, how does an 11-year-old black girl end up in Bridgeton, Maine in 1778? Here's what we know. According to family records, those amazing letters and stories that they've left behind, Anna Flint Perley, Enoch Perley's wife, was the daughter of Deacon John Flint. Deacon John Flint lived in Salem, and family stories say that he bought 4 Guinea slave girls from the dock in Salem as a dowry for his daughters. Little historical side note here. We only have record of him having 2 daughters, but he had 2 sons who both married, so it's possible he was buying slaves for his daughters-in-law as well as for his daughter, or his 2 daughters. Okay, what else do we know? We know that Deacon John Flint was married to Huldah Putnam, and if you've done any work in New England genealogy, wow. I swear that, like, my husband is related to Enoch Perley, and I probably, at some point in time, I'm going to find out that we're cousins too. It's quite something, and his family is actually the Putnam family as well on his mother's side. So Huldah Putnam Flint, we know from family history that she taught the slaves to read, write, and speak English. And she taught them how to do household tasks. Okay, great. That was wonderful. And we know that Enoch and Anna were married on March 17th, 1778, and they moved to Pondicherry in June of 1778, and they brought 11-year-old Chloe with them. Now here's what we don't know. We don't know how long Chloe was in Salem before she came to what was then becoming Bridgestown. We don't know how long she was there, but she was there long enough to learn to read, write, speak English and learn household tasks. So her job would have been that she would be the helper in the household, so she had to know how to do a lot of things. So my speculation is she was probably there 2 or 3 years. That seems fair. Maybe it was shorter, maybe it was longer, we don't know. But that means that she would have arrived somewhere around the age of 8 or 9. Well, how did she get to Salem, you ask? Obviously, she didn't come here on her own at the age of 8. So she would have come over in one of these horrible slave ships under terrible, terrible conditions. So I brought my tape measure, because this is an important thing. So this is a plan of a slave ship. They wanted to figure out how to get as much cargo in there as they possibly could. And if you had extra cargo and you lost some along the way, then you're planning ahead for that, because you want to maximize space. I'm saying this in a cold and clinical way because that's the only way I can deal with it. So what we had on these ships was each deck was 3 feet and 10 inches. So let's see, 3 feet, 10 inches, right about there. this is how much space you had above you. But then they realized they could get more cargo on if they cut it down to 3 feet 3 inches. So this is what's above you. So if you're a grown man, you don't have a lot of room to sit up. And they gave you all of 10 to 13 inches wide, so you had about this much room as you're lying there. That is, I'm not a broad-shouldered person. So at the most, 13, which would be here, and I'd have to cut off my arm. So this was a absolutely deplorable conditions, and I don't think any of us think otherwise. And the trip took 3 to 8 months. And it would not have been smooth sailing the whole way. There would have been storms at sea. It would have been a really horrible, horrible, horrible situation for the people coming across that way. Okay, so let's talk about Salem. Why did they bring slaves to Salem? Well, we had the triangle you probably have heard about, where there were goods going from, goods meaning enslaved human beings, coming from West Africa, and we were sending to the West Indies from Salem, we were sending fish, livestock, lumber, and then the Salem ships were bringing back sugar, molasses, and coffee. What were the slave owners looking for in Salem? Now, the able-bodied slaves that came in would have gone to the sugar plantations because they needed to be strong to do that work. And if they came in and they were sickly or they were too weak to handle that level of work, they died very quickly. But the Salem slave owners, they didn't want the slaves that were coming back from the West Indies because they were sickly refuse, like they'd been used up. So what they were looking for was the less able-bodied, or someone like Chloe who was younger, they were more likely to be trainable. And the area of Africa where she came from, the West Guinea area, that was considered like the best place to get slaves from. That was the best. They were more likely to be healthy, trainable, smart. So there's a book called The Negro in Colonial New England by Lorenzo Johnston Green, written in 1942. And he said that the slaves were not likely to be sold at auction. They were sold off the dock or from a warehouse, which ties in with the family lore of John Flint buying them off the dock in Salem. So that goes along with that. And some of the advertisements that he has in his book would say things like, very likely agreeable and healthy Negro boys and girls lately imported from Guinea, prime young slaves just imported from Africa, fit for town or country service. I have feelings about that, perhaps you do too. So here is the port of Salem, Massachusetts. There's the dock. So that's where Chloe would have come in, and then from there she would have either been walked or have been transported to John Flint's house, where she would have been cleaned up and fed, and then she would begin her new life. Now imagine being 8 years old and having all of that happen. I can't even. So we also got some census data from that period of time. So this is the approximate number of Negroes in New England on the eve of the Revolutionary War. So Massachusetts, and Maine was part of Massachusetts still at that point, had 5,249 Negroes, which was about 1.8% of the population. Then after the Revolution, 1790, we've separated out Maine. Maine is still part of Massachusetts, but they're separating it out. So in the Maine province, they've got 536 Negroes living there. One of them is our Chloe. Here is the census for 1790 for Bridgetown Plantation. Right up here, we've got Enoch Perley, and we see some numbers after that. Here's what those numbers are showing us. There are free white persons, male over 16, there are 3 of them, so Enoch and I can't remember who was there at that point. the other two males, and then free white persons males under 16, there were two of those, so that would have been a couple of his kids most likely. We've got free white persons females. We don't care how old they are, we just lump them all together. Not significant. And then we have number of all other free persons. We have one, and that is Chloe. And she is the only person in the census for Bridgton who falls into that category. So Massachusetts freed slaves in 1783, 1790, she's a free woman. Yay. Now, when she was a free woman, there's a couple of different stories where Enoch Perley goes to her and says, basically, you're free, what would you like to do? And so this book right here is called Short as Any Dream. It's written by Elizabeth Shepley Sargent. And she's a descendant of Enoch Perley's. And she has taken family letters and Nancy Perley's, Enoch's daughter, diary, and she has written a book about that, or she wrote it a long time ago. And this is a couple of the quotes that she uses when Nancy asks Chloe, well, why didn't you go do something else? And she said, who would help your marm with the spinning and the washing and baking? And who would I leave the pickling and the plum trees I planted? And why and how would I leave them? She says, no, Chloe will serve the Perleys to the end of the farm, to the end, in the farm. This language is horrible. No, Chloe will serve the Perleys to the end of the farm, in the township they cleared out of the forest, and her dust will lie with their dust in the little burying ground in the pasture. So those plum trees are going to come back. We're going to hear more about those plum trees. And when I was coming up with this picture, I specifically wanted it to have plum blossoms in there because that was an important thing for her. She planted plum trees and she didn't want to leave and not see those bear fruit. Which brings us to another really cool thing about Chloe Perley. This is the jury box that is in the collection at the British Historical Society. And this is a bit of the write-up about it. This jury box was purportedly made here in Bridgton circa 1780 for use in cases of the circuit courts of Massachusetts Bay, province of Maine. It was in the possession of Enoch Perley, the town's first justice of the peace and representative for the proprietors in town. When rediscovered in 1985, this box contained a number of legal documents pertaining to court cases held in the town. You ready for this? Guess who was a witness on those papers that they found? Miss Chloe Perley. Here's her signature right here, again, again, and again. Now, it was very rare for a woman to be witnessing legal documents. Again, not really important, women. But you can see on this one, Becky Perley, who was one of Enoch's daughters, signed that one. And then over here, Betsy Burnham signed that one, in addition to Chloe. So the fact that this is someone who was a slave and then freed, living in this family, and being asked to witness these legal documents, that's big stuff. I don't know of any other case of this. I've never come across another one, because Chloe is kind of unique in a lot of ways anyway. Now, here is a letter, an excerpt from a letter that Chloe wrote to Nancy Perley. She is now married. Nancy has married, and she's living in Freiburg with her husband, Dr. Rule Barrows. And Chloe is writing her a letter. It says, we're going to have a fine parcel of damsons. We shall endeavor to send you some peppers as soon as they will answer to pick. Don't get any more vinegar unless you borrow. When I come over, I will bring you 2 gallons, but that won't be till October. October. You want to know what a damson is? Mm-hmm. Anybody know? It's a plum. Yeah. Oh. So her plums, finally, she was able to harvest plums from her plum trees. I just thought that was a really lovely, lovely thing. Now, in 1823, Enoch Perley's wife dies. And he writes a very touching letter to his brother Thomas about the loss of his wife. As she's dying, she looks at him and she says, you know, it's so hard to part. And she says, but it will only be for a short time. And so they just up throughout their letters and the way that they talk about each other, they're very much a bonded pair, I guess we could call them. But then he goes on to say, I conclude you will wish to know what course I expect to pursue. I have now in family Chloe and a kind girl which has been with us near 4 years by the name of Hannah, I think it's Strout, a hired man and John's oldest son, which would be Augustus Perley. And I think to continue this family at present. And Chloe must be the principal superintendent, who with Hannah, which is a very good girl, and by the advice of John's wife, I hope that we shall get along without great inconvenience, as Chloe has had all the care of the housework for near a year. He goes on to say, I would observe that Chloe's health is better and has been so for 2 or 3 years than it was for 5 to 10 years past. She seldom fails of doing business and was never so useful in the family, for she has been of late, and I consider that her being sent by Providence into my family was one of heaven's important earthly blessings which has been bestowed upon me. I wish I may feel a proper sense of gratitude for this and every other mercy. Now, whenever Enoch Perley is mentioning Chloe in his letters, she is never other. She is always his family. She's always his family. So he would say things like, my family has been well, except that we had, measles, and Chloe and John are still recovering. Or we had another illness and Chloe and Thomas had a lighter case. So it's always that context, which I don't want to make it seem like, oh, she had all the choices and she didn't. But she ended up in this situation where she was family to them. And her grandsons, Enoch's grandsons, honored her as well. So let's talk about what happened to Chloe during her lifetime. So she was enslaved, she was freed. She lived in this country under 1 king and 7 presidents, the last one being Andrew Jackson. She went through an Indian uprising in the early days of Pondicherry, where they all had to scatter and go to Pearsontown, Standish. And that's where Enoch's oldest son was born. He was baptized in the little red church there. She went through the American Revolution, the War of 1812, and there was also a threat of war with France because of Napoleon. So she was here for the founding of Bridgton and all of the things that went on with that, the churches, Bridgton Academy. She was involved in all of those things because of her presence in that family. First Independence Day, Maine statehood. And the thing with Chloe is that she embraced her new life, but she never forgot where she came from. She always wore a turban. She had hoop earrings. She had a conjure bag that she had around her neck, and she would go throw her bones and read them, find out what's going to happen. So she always came back to, she offered to help the Squire Perley out because somebody had done something bad to him, and she offered to burn the person, just a little bit, just a little. And he said no. But there are times in this, as short as any dream book, where Chloe will say something, and then Nancy will say, she's trying to be white. Yeah, she's trying to fit in wherever she is. She's very versatile like that. She's very adaptable. So I wanted to add a ghost story, because what history lesson would be, what would it be without a ghost story? So I mentioned the ladder and this little window up here. That was Chloe's room. So she slept up in the loft. So this cabin is still in existence. It's one of the oldest buildings around, and it's on a little peninsula over by Highland Lake. It's next door to the dentist office right there, Mountain View Dentist. Kind of sits on a peninsula off there. The family that owned it at this point of the story allowed me to go in and tour it, which was so awesome of them. Carrie Castleman Ross, who some of you may know, was kind of keeping an eye on the place for them, so she took me over and let me in. And we stood and talked for a few minutes. It looks very different now. The door here on the side is gone. The fireplace is in a different place. But you can still see like the hewn oak beams. You can see where they chiseled things out. And so there's still a lot of it there. So Carrie said to me, I'm going to walk out on the lake. It was winter at the time and it was frozen. So, although Carrie's a pretty determined person, she might be able to pull it off. So she said, I'll go out and take a walk on the lake and just let you commune. So I was standing there and I was thinking about, you know, the building of it and what it must have been like to be living in that 18 by 18 one-room cabin with Enoch and Anna and little Chloe, and Chloe going up to her loft at night. And I was standing there thinking about those things. And then Carrie came back in, and we were standing there talking about Chloe, and just sort of saying, you know, this was somebody who was an important person in this town, and she should not be forgotten. And as we were talking about that, the door behind us opened. And we both turned around expecting to see someone, and of course there was no one there. And we just looked at each other, and we looked back the door, and we said, hello, Chloe. Now, maybe it wasn't Chloe. It was Chloe. It was totally Chloe. Totally Chloe. So Chloe, because she's never going to be forgotten now, is featured in 2 of my books. She's featured in Cabin and Glory and in The Old Squire. And possibly, maybe one more. Because I'm feeling like she may need a book of her own where she tells her story. And I'm thinking maybe she's telling her story from like when she's old and rheumaticky and she's not, you know, quite as busy with household chores. Maybe she's going to do some reminiscing. Because there's a lot of story there that I think would be good to capture. It's hard because we have just so much information. So there's a lot that has to be kind of woven from what we do know. And that's okay. That's okay. I have a couple of other books that apparently I'm going to be writing. So this series is called Voices of Pondicherry, and it's very much based on facts and reality and history and all of those things. But I'm thinking I'm going to do another separate but related series called The Tales of Pondicherry, where I can kind of take some of these stories that I've been running into and sort of spin them in a more fictional way without having to be, you know, keeping to the straight and narrow with the history. We'll see. There's a town farm kid that, I don't know, I think he's got a story he wants to tell. So who knows? Who knows where it would go? But for me, it always comes back to Chloe and what she went through to get here, unintentionally on her part, but that resilience, that adaptability, she made a life for herself. Even though she went through horrible, horrible things, she made a life for herself. And I think we can all draw from that kind of strength because we all go through stuff. There's always going to be something. But when we can draw from that strength and take those examples of other people and go, okay, they made a life for themselves after something really bad happened, maybe I can too. So that, my friends, is Cloe Perley.
Was there anything that you found in any of the letters? You said that the family wrote a lot that gave you some idea of her experience with the other villagers, townsfolk?
She seems like she was very much a part of the community. There are numerous references to her. One of the things Mike Davis, who does a lot of Bridgton research as well, tells me that she was very famous for her gingerbread. So they would go and they would have like a town muster day and that sort of thing, and she would be there selling her gingerbread. So she was very much a part of that family. She comes up in a lot of different places, people just making mention of Chloe. You know, she was just part of the community. I never ever heard anything where people were like, oh, her. I've never run into that. Not that it didn't happen, but.
Which, when you told the story about her with her,
Well, I didn't want to mess with her.
burn someone
Did
or
not
something,
wanna
but
mess
they
with her.
seem to take that in stride. So,
So I think Enoch kind of looked at that like, okay, that's a thing.
mhm.
One of the stories that I've run into a couple of different places is the Perley's youngest daughter, Hannah, was very ill. So this family, as many other families were, was riddled with tuberculosis consumption, like bad. So she had what they called galloping consumption. She was like 19 years old. And she got very sick very fast. And Chloe went through the snow from the new house over to the little house, and she got down the ladder and she hoisted herself up in there, and she read her bones. I don't know what the correct terminology would be like, but she read the bones. And she came back into the house and just lost it with Nancy, and Nancy was like, what is going on? And she said, the bones felt the wrong way. Life is going from this house. And she was correct. So, right? She was correct. Who else can I answer a question for?
Was Chloe interested in having marriage or?
I was hoping somebody would ask that question. Here's what she had to say about marriage. Who would I marry?
Mhm.
There's nobody here for me.
Mhm.
The only other black person in the area was a slave in Freiburg whose name was Limbo. And if you've read the Freiburg Chronicles, June O'Donnell's books, she talks about Limbo. And we actually had gotten together for coffee one day, and she's talking about this slave Limbo, and I'm like, I think I know this guy. So Chloe said, the only person that I could marry would be Limbo, and she couldn't marry him because he couldn't read and write. And she had no patience with uneducated black people. I said, well, Chloe, a little the privilege of the Perleys rubbing off on you there. But yeah, she had nobody. There was no one for her to marry. And Nancy asked her, like, well, would you have rather stayed in Salem and married one of those slaves in the brick houses? And she said, no, this is my home. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is where I live. Why would I go to Salem? I don't know. What else?
The little cabin that you found and toured, is that the spot where they lived, or was it moved there?
So it was moved there, I think, in the 60s?
1936.
1930s, oh, earlier than the 60s, okay. 1936. So it would have been at the Geiger's Orchard, Five Fields Orchard
Oh,
in
right.
South Bridgeton.
Mhm.
So that was their original house. But when John was on his way, he was going to be having his first son, Enoch had to have a better house for his son than that. Enoch was very much of the, he was very British in a lot of ways. So the first son meant a lot to him. So they built a new house, and then the new house burned down, so they had to build the third house, which is the one that's there right now. But that little cabin was moved across to where there's like a big apple barn, and it was used as a tool shed. So when the second house burned down, there was a note somewhere that said that they had gone and stayed in the little house again. But then eventually that was taken over by Walter Hawkins. Was he the one that moved it, I think?
Yeah.
Yep. So he moved it over to that peninsula. And it's been taken good care of. The people that have owned it have appreciated it, which is really great. What else?
You mentioned Putnam,
Mm.
which, okay, is that part of the Putnams from Salem?
Yes. Yeah.
Of which floor?
Yes. Yes. So there was as we like to call them, the good Putnams and the bad Putnams. And that's one of the books that I have that I want to tell, the Tales of Pondicherry. That's one of the books I want to write about. I want to write about a young woman who's been raised on, her vaunted family and, how wonderful they were and all of that. And then she finds out that they were, of the bad Putnams. My husband's mother was, I'm sure, of the good Putnams. Another interesting thing about Enoch Perley and his family is that his uncle was General Israel Putnam of Revolutionary War fame. So that's somebody that he would have grown up knowing and would have also met Chloe at some point when he wasn't off having daring adventures. If you haven't read a lot about Israel Putnam, he is like the great American hero. That guy, he had so many different experiences where, you know, he should not have lived, and he did. He was very much a swashbuckling hero type. Quite a fascinating guy, related to my husband, of course.
Was he the surveyor?
Enoch was, he did surveying, but you may be thinking of Solomon Wood. He was the guy that did all of the surveying. He was on the team, but they did all the surveying for Bridgton, and then
That's who Enoch worked with, or was it
yeah,
apprentice?
they certainly knew each other, but he was here earlier because he was having to get everything laid out for the proprietors. So Enoch wasn't working on his team, as far as I know. And then the second division, which was part where Harrison came in, that was done by a different surveyor. That was done by one of the Kimballs. So, what else do you want to know about Bridgton and the surrounding area? More ghost stories. So if you ever want to visit, and I had one of my friends on Facebook said that she visits Chloe's grave every year now that she knows about her. If you ever want to visit her, if you go up 107 to Five Fields Farm, which is Geiger's Orchard, between the house, the blue house, and the Baldpate parking lot, there is a little road that goes off parallel to the house. And there's a little cemetery in there. That's where Chloe is buried. So I like to stop in and say hello on a regular basis. There are a number of Perleys there. You can see by the death dates that the children of the Perley family did not fare well. They had a lot of losses, one after the other. Again, that whole consumption thing, I think, played a big role in that. So if you've got a parent with consumption and you've got a baby and you're like, oh, hey, they thought it was hereditary at the time, so they wouldn't have known that they were actually infecting their children.
Well, I think in Cabin and Glory, when children were dying, you, in like one winter it was diphtheria or something.
Oh,
did you know these things, or are you guessing, or?
No, we know those things.
You know that.
Yeah, so they died one after another. The Peabody family,
Was one of them thrush, or?
they called it throat distemper or white death, so it's diphtheria.
Yeah.
And basically what happens in diphtheria is like your throat closes. So they lost 4 children, the Peabody family lost 4 children in a couple of weeks. Just brutal. And then they lost another one later on. So yeah, and then the Perley family, I don't know what their children died of. There was one child who had what they called fits, and she would be fine, running around the house, and then suddenly she would have fits to the point where they had to tie her to a bedpost so that she wouldn't hurt herself. So they just had
Epilepsy?
awful.
Maybe.
It could be, but there's also, if I recall from my research into tuberculosis, because, you know, that's what we do in our spare time. I think there is a type of tuberculosis that is related to that, and it could have been something like that. So, one of the things, the woman that Chloe wanted to burn for Enoch, she had cursed him, and that's why she wanted to burn him. So she cursed him and said that you will not have descendants of the male, you will not have male descendants that survive beyond the 4th generation or something. And like one after another of the sons and the grandsons and the great-grandsons died until finally one guy broke the curse. But that was why Chloe wanted to burn that woman.
Are there any plum trees?
I've not seen any. Lots of apple trees. It would be interesting to find that out, though.
Wouldn't that be fun?
So one of the things that someone, it may have been Tom Geiger that told me this, but somebody told me that when that cemetery was created because the Perleys were so into forests and timber. That's where most of their money was. They put in all different types of trees in that cemetery, and you can still see a lot of different trees in that cemetery. It's a small cemetery. I mean, it's maybe this big, but there's a lot of interesting trees there. So I would like to poke around now and see if there's plum trees.
And they don't mind you going over to the
cemetery? No.
Right?
No.
Yeah,
No.
I've been there a couple of times.
Did you know who you were there to see?
Thanks to you.
Yes, thanks to you.
And June Geiger.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, anytime anybody wants to go pay their respects, feel free. Okay. What else can I help you with? Suggestions for dinner? You need toll money to get home? All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm guessing these are your books?
Oh, yes, sorry. I'm very good at selling. So yes, these are my books over here, the 4 Pondicherry books, plus another series that I started called The Guest Book, which takes place in Acadia. And then I have Nonprofit Financial Mastery, because, yeah. That's what I do.